This is Chi for Yourself. John's guest today is James L. Creighton, author of Loving Through Your Differences.
Hi, and welcome to Chi for Yourself. Great to have you with us today, wherever you happen to be in the world at this moment. If you're in a relationship where one of you, or maybe both of you, insists that it's my way or the highway, you want to hear what today's guest has to say. James L. Creighton works with couples to help them to communicate and resolve conflict. He gives them tools to build happy and healthy relationships. And besides working with couples, James has conducted communication trainings, mediations, and conflict resolution processes for universities, public schools, Job Corps, Fortune 500 corporations, and government entities too. James L. Creighton is the author of Loving Through Your Differences, Building Strong Relationships from Separate Realities. And James, it's common to ask guests what prompted them to write their books. That tends to be the first question. But in your case, I have to ask about your marriage, which has lasted 50 years. In any era, that's remarkable, but today it's really unheard of. How, if we can put this in sort of an elevator speech, how does a marriage last 50 years?
Hard work. I stuff that's in the book, I got interested in for personal reasons. My experience is all couples fight some. Some couples fight very little and some couples fight a lot. And my wife and I were in the fight a lot category. And so I needed to figure out how to do something different. And so that thus began a 53-year search for what skills work, what are there processes to follow, and so forth. And the book is sort of my summary of here's what I learned, maybe it'll help you too. So it's as I sometimes say, everything in the book has been field tested. My wife and I have done all the good stuff in the book and all the bad stuff in the book and so on. I would guess if there was one skill that what you have to have, it's listening. And we early on got involved. When we married, we created a conglomerate family with 5 teenage kids. And my academic training was in psychology. My behavioral training was pretty minimal. And I got involved with a program called Parent Effectiveness Training, which taught listening and sending and problem solving skills. I became an instructor of that. And somewhere along the line of having taught the course enough time, I got so I could listen if I'd work at it. Sometimes you kind of have to force yourself to pay attention and not run all the stuff in your head and so on, but it can be done.
The subtitle of the book is Building Strong Relationships from Separate Realities. That might sound a little strange to people. What do we mean by separate realities?
Okay. Well, let's use a very simple kind of example. My wife and I go to a movie. I think it's a great movie, and she's bored to tears. She doesn't like car chases. And as we leave the movie, if I say, well, that was a great movie and so on, we can get into disagreement, and with a little skill, we can turn it into a fight. And what's happening is it's absolutely true that I enjoyed it. It's absolutely true that she was bored to tears, that she has a different way of experiencing things than I do. And this, but having a disagreement over a movie is pretty silly. Could be the same disagreement over raising kids, how to spend money, sexuality, so forth and so on. And literally each person brings their own set of experience and background and training and so forth. And the way they interpret the event creates the meaning for them. So it's quite possible for 2 people to go through exactly the same experience and experience it entirely differently. And well, I'll give you a concrete example. The couple, Bill was raised in an immigrant family, and the big important issue in their family was to make it, to be a success, and so forth, and to show the world that they had made it. His wife, Maureen, was born in a working class family where the big value was don't get above yourself. Don't separate yourself from your peers and friends. And now, our guy wants to buy a Mercedes-Benz because that'll show the world he's made it. Maureen freaks out at the very thought of being in a Mercedes-Benz. She's not even sure she wants to take a ride in one, let alone own one, because to her that represents setting herself up above him. I mean, she stretched the limits enough going to college. That in itself was kind of a little questionable. And now to be driving around in Mercedes. Now, it's the same car, but what the car means to John and what it means to Maureen is two entirely different things. And that's because they bring their own interpretation from it. So what I'm really saying is that feelings don't just happen from an external cause. Despite the songs that say, "You make me feel like dancing," and so forth and so on. That says the cause of feelings is out there. But what we're trying to say is that the cause of feelings is, yes, there's an external event, but you interpret that external event in light of all your background and experience. And your wife or husband interprets it in their experience, and they may arrive at entirely different feelings from exactly the same identical external experience.
So is that what you call in the book the emotional reality of our separate emotional reality?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. And my experience is that these are some of the harder issues to resolve. I mean, how to divvy up the money to pay the bills and so forth can be challenging, but if suddenly what you find out is what you're trying to negotiate is not how to get the bills paid, but what are the priorities in our life, what really matters in my reality versus what really matters in your reality. Those are more challenging to resolve. And a great deal of the book is concentrating on how do you resolve issues when they emerge out of this different interpretation of events.
A quick Google search finds that divorce is a common occurrence in Western cultures, but it also shows us divorce rates for subsequent marriages is even higher. What are the remarrieds not learning, or are their expectations just too high?
I didn't realize that fact. That's interesting. But I can tell you, my first wife died quite suddenly. And when I remarried, about 6 months after I remarried, I was having an argument with my wife when I realized this was exactly the same argument that I'd had with my first wife. I could sort of understand where I got the script for my part, but where I got so obviously I was doing something. There were certain patterns. I was cueing her somehow to respond in certain ways, and there were predictable responses. I think one of the values of marriage is you're making enough of a commitment that maybe you'll hang in and work on yourself and work on each other and so forth and so on, rather than just separate. What I guess is going on is something where they're just repeating the same pattern, getting to the same place, engaging in exactly the same behaviors, and having learned that it didn't work. I'm on TV. Somebody was telling me there's another phone call coming in. I'm sorry.
Do you need to take that? Is that important?
No. I'm okay. Just a misunderstanding. One of the things in particular that happens is there's a pattern of escalation, which seems to be common to almost all fights. And it starts out with usually with blaming and accusing. And then the next step is you expand the issue. What I mean by that is you start out arguing about a toothpaste cap that wasn't put on, put back on. And then it moved to, and you're always so messy. And this is just a sign of how irresponsible you are in life. And then not just me that feels this way, your mother told me, or your sister, or the next door neighbor, or then kind of on up until finally the fight isn't even about whatever the issue was. The fight really is to hurt each other. And one of the things that we try to look at in the book is if you can recognize when you're starting to make those steps, then you can call yourself on it. You can stop, you can de-escalate and so forth, so that you don't have to get to the higher rungs on that. And to do that, the best way I know is actually set some rules as a couple. Because one of the problems is in a marriage, he comes into the marriage with his family rules. That's what he thinks is normal. She comes into the marriage with her family rules, what they think is normal. And they conflict at some point. And the only way I know how to handle it is instead of his rules and her rules, we have to somehow create our rules. And so my wife, for example, on the escalation, we've agreed we won't expand the issue. We won't start with a toothpaste cap and end up with you're utterly irresponsible in life and so on.
You have that agreement in advance.
We had that agreement in advance. Now sometimes we still do it, and we'll get called on it. And the only thing is, having agreed to the rule, I'll back on down a layer, back down to the toothpaste cap and so forth. In fact, I was going to tell you about, I was mentioning the listening thing and how difficult it is and so on. We found, even though both my wife and I are trained in these kind of listening skills and so on, there are just times emotionally we're not available to listen. We're so upset we just can't listen. And I think our marriage got saved by a simple thing called 5-minute rule. The way the 5-minute rule works is either person can say 5-minute rule and everything else stops dead. You don't do anything but agree on who's going to go first. And if you can't agree on that, flip a coin. And then that person gets 5 minutes to say whatever he or she wants without interruption, preferably without any loud body language or anything like that. And then the other person gets 5 minutes. And the reason it works is 5 minutes is long enough that if nobody's telling you you're bad, stupid, or crazy for feeling that way, it kind of, the heat goes out of it. About 4 minutes, I start to bore myself. You know, I can see that I'm just repeating the same stuff over and over. And sometimes we have to do a second round, and it may not end any more spectacularly than, well, I don't have any more to say. But that's okay. From there, you can get back to problem solving and feeling good about each other.
I know this isn't a very clinical idea, but I'm going to run this by you. Do you think we send out a sort of energy that causes us to attract repetitive combatant people into our lives over and over and over?
I believe so, but I also know it's one of the things we do is we almost unconsciously cue other people on how they're supposed to behave. This is the classic self-fulfilling prophecy thing, where you expect a certain behavior from the other person, so you act in a way that generates from them the behavior you expect. One I remember well was a woman who felt neglected and really kind of uncared for, and she wasn't getting much intimacy from her husband. And when he'd walk in from work, she would begin almost immediately with cutting, acid cutting remarks and so forth. and he would naturally withdraw and not want to relate to her and so on. And we couldn't even tell whether he would have withdrawn anyway. Maybe he was just that kind of a person or so on. But she was certainly behaving in a way that would cause him to act, to withdraw, to act, so on. So, and whether we send out an attractive energy of some kind, that's possible. I don't know. But I do know we send out behaviors that tell other people how they're supposed to act. And lo and behold, they do.
You write about something that's very interesting in the book, what you call humans are sense-making creatures. Can you talk about that?
Well, the whole understanding of how feelings occur is changing. The latest findings in neuroscience are saying that the event happens out here, and from being a baby on, we try out various interpretations, try out, try to predict, if you will, what that event means. And eventually we arrive at an understanding of what events mean. But we're constantly trying. Actually, there's a fairly dramatic example of this on the internet in one of the TED Talks. The guy plays a recording and it seems all jumbled and you just can't get it. He plays it again, still can't get it. And then he plays it unjumbled, and what it says is Brexit is a terrible idea. But now he goes and plays the original recording, same one that we couldn't understand, and very clearly we all hear Brexit's a terrible idea. What's happening? Our inners have projected out the information that we have, and lo and behold, that's what we now experience.
Families teach, or they used to teach, the idea that adults do the talking and the kids speak when they're spoken to. And I'm wondering, in your own experience, have you seen a change? At least I hope we've seen a change over the years to that kind of approach.
You're recommending the approach where children are speaking?
Well, I'm just wondering, I know I'm segueing here into children relationships with kids, but I wanted to make sure I asked this question because it was so common when I was growing up that kids really don't have a say in their upbringing. And I was wondering, is that changing? It seems like it should. I'm not the professional, and I'm wondering, are adults and parents in general changing their ways? Are they letting children have more shall we say in their upbringing, or at least have a voice?
They certainly are. And that, in fact, is the whole problem-solving approach assumes that all the parties to the problem are able to speak their mind and so forth. It can get permissive, because you also need to teach the kids to respect what's going on, understand how the impact of their words affect other people and so forth. But yes, I think the starting place is to assume that, and particularly when it has to do with decisions that affect them, that the children have a right to participate in those decisions.
With all of the social media effect in society today, I'm wondering how much of an impact is that having on relationships in general? Are people taking their cues from this? Are they bringing harmful elements into the relationship because of social media? Well,
one of the harmful things is that they're so busy looking at their smartphone that they don't talk to each other. That's definitely happening. The figures on how much time kids spend on social media is just staggering. So that they're not, their social relationships are taking place through the intervention of a medium, an electronic medium, rather than them getting together and having fun together and so forth and so on. On the other hand, other people are reaching out and connecting in ways that they didn't before. So, like many innovations, It has a positive side to it. People access information they couldn't. If you live in a remote Pakistani village, you may be able to relate through social media where you can't travel anywhere near a large city and so forth. It's a mixed bag. I know families that create rules like no smartphones at the table while we're having dinner, things like that. So just to ensure that they relate to each other.
Mm-hmm. Do you like the idea of limiting a child's participation in social media, or trying in some way to curb that?
Well, I had the good fortune that my kids got raised before the social media came along. So I haven't had to think through some of these issues. I watched my son, though, not have a live television in his home, even though they could easily afford it. And my observation is the kids are fine. They do spend a lot of time on social media now. And they would go out and as a family and rent a movie and play the movie at home, watch it together. But the kids just didn't plunk down and they got home from school and watched TV for 8 hours or something like that. But as I say, I lucked out. Social media came along after I had that problem.
I know what you mean. You write in the book that resistance breeds resistance. Talk about that process.
Okay. Well, this is anytime somebody says something and you contradict it, fight it, come up with your own idea, and so forth and so on. What it does in the other person is it encourages them to escalate. They say it again louder, with more confrontational words, more challenging, so forth. And as they resist it, well, then your resistance is building, and so forth and so on. So one of the skills of listening is the skill of summarizing what you understood the other person to be feeling and thinking, and just checking it out with them. You're really upset because you felt this and that and so on. You're not saying I agree with you. You're not saying, yeah, I'm a jerk, I did it. What you're saying is, I understand that you feel this way. And as that happens, the truth is feelings change more quickly when they're accepted than when they're resisted. You accept the feeling, something else new comes in. It's like water coming down a hose. If you close off the opening, the pressure builds. Maybe it pops out over here, but sometimes it just builds to the point it goes splosh all over. If the water can flow through, there's often some crud and corruption when you first open it up, but it flows through and soon you've got clean water and something you can deal with.
We talk about pre-existing conditions as a way to approach conflict. I would guess another pre-existing parameter, if you will, is we have a problem, not you are the problem.
Yeah, that's the minute you start out as an enemy, you're going to have a heck of a time resolving it in a mutually satisfactory manner. So one of the things that's in the book, the two major skills, the listening and the sending. And let me talk about sending, just go back to our silly little movie. If I say, I really enjoyed that movie, I'm telling the truth. If I say that's a good movie, that judgment contradicts my wife's judgment, and we're in trouble. So it matters how you communicate your concerns. Do you communicate them as I'm experiencing this feeling, or do you communicate it as you caused this feeling and you're to blame, and so forth and so on? And if you're feeling thwarted, you don't know how to pay all the bills with the money that you have available, so on. If you start in on we're in trouble because you're spending too much money, that's saying you're the problem. if we start in and saying we only have so much money and I'd like to sit down and figure out how to allocate it together, then we have a problem. And it's still a problem, but you have a chance of getting there, arriving at something you can both live with.
To wrap up now, one more question, and I guess it's the natural or obvious one. What do you most hope readers will take away from this book?
Well, if they get the idea that it's okay for them to have one emotional reality and their partner to have another, and both are true to the partner, each person does literally have that meaning. And so you have to start there. It's the difference between you have a feeling that's different than mine and that makes you the problem, versus it's the nature of life that we both have experiences that are different. And that's kind of the starting point. And so it's the challenge is to understand each other's differences and accept them rather than to use them to make the other person an enemy.
Your website is jameslcreighton.com.
Yes, right.
And the book is Loving Through Your Differences, Building Strong Relationships from Separate Realities, from our guest, James L. Creighton. James, thanks for writing the book on a topic that is so very important. I know readers will take away some very useful tools to help them through their relationships, and we'll be following your work, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
I'd be happy to, John. Enjoyed talking with you.